All right, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. I actually come from a technical background, an architect background. And it's kind of interesting that I've moved from that to people and business almost exclusively. So there's a lot of stuff up there, but basically that says I've been doing software development for, actually I don't know that I should put the years up there anymore, but a long time. But been in the space for a long time, and one of the things I want to say is I was not born Agile. At first I was violently opposed to it. So if you have that feeling, it's perfectly fine. So I've worked with a lot of large companies, Capital One being one of the largest I've worked with, where we're currently helping them transform 500 Agile teams to Agile. It's a pretty big endeavor. So what I'm really going to be talking about, brass tacks here, is let's say you've got a company with a software IT budget, and I'm going to include product management in that, or business analysts, however you want to look at it, of say 50 million. Okay, and then you've got product management in there. So a total of 60 million bucks. That's your current budget, let's say. So whatever your budget is, think about that for a moment. And then you've got your revenues. So in this case, this is actually not a made-up example. This represents a client. $500 million in revenues per year. Now you might be thinking, Agile's going to help me save money. And that's fantastic. In many ways, in some industries, you don't have a lot of options for making more revenue. Maybe you're regulated or something like that. But let's say your revenues are $500 million per year. You might be thinking, Agile's going to help me save money, reduce my IT budget, or do more with less, that kind of thing. That's interesting. But I think one of your largest opportunities is actually to make more money. And on the saving side, it's not just to save money, it's to save that money faster. Right? So it's not just saving some money, it's saving it faster. So what I'm going to talk about is how you're taking that budget, right? Why not cut it to zero? Because you want to incrementally save or make more money. Right? The reason for having the IT there is to incrementally save or make more money. That's the only reason it exists. So we're going to talk about taking that $50 million of revenue increase per year in this example, and without increasing our costs, make significantly more money, right? That's the whole point. That's the whole point. So how can we possibly do that? Well, if you look at all the projects that you have out there, some folks out here probably have actually hundreds of projects. Who has hundreds of projects? Anybody? Hundreds of projects. Fantastic. So if you look at any one of those projects, it has a life cycle, a time frame. And this is not, from the IT perspective, of the project. It's from somebody goes, this is a great idea. This is a strategic initiative. This is something we should do. How many people have heard or said, finally, after 2 years, we're getting around to that project? That 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, counts. That counts. That delay is cost to you, right? Well, I understand what you're saying, Damon, but it's not that simple. I know. All right, so we get all these projects. They have different sizes. If you look at these in detail, we all know that there's gold in there, there's silver in there, and then use whatever word you want. I'm going to use bronze for today. But there's that other stuff, sometimes called junk or whatever. If we look at it in detail, this is how we do it in the traditional way. We're going to do it all, so we're not going to look at where the gold and silver and bronze is, but it's there. So one of the typical things that Agile does is we first learn is a backlog. Right, so the backlog basically is a sorting filter that says, let's do the gold first. You don't really get some of the benefits of Agile if you continue to deliver all of this. Right? Let me ask you, when should you deliver that stuff at the very end? Never. That is the correct answer, in my script anyway. Right? So if you look at this, where do you want to focus? Not on the project, not picking the project to do. You want to focus on the left-hand side of all of those projects. That's where you want to focus. But how do you do that? Okay, so a very simple example. I know some of you do embedded hardware, some of you do financial stuff, some healthcare, some are startups, right? All across the board. I'm using this example to illustrate the point. So let's say you want to do a movie-going planner like Fandango or something like that. There's different areas of value, not features, not components, value. If I can see in my app, okay, back in 2008, not today, that would not be enough. All I can see is what theaters are near me. That has value all by itself. And it has different areas of functionality, which would be things like using GPS, typing in a zip code. Do I want it on a map or a list? All kinds of areas of value there, but that's probably the top value. Now, a traditional thing to do would be to deliver this all. But Agile says there's a concept called minimum viable increment. Sometimes this is called minimum viable product. I like increment because it says we're going to increment as opposed to, bam, you got the product. If we just do these three, I'm going to start realizing value. Now, viable here does not mean anything other than Webster's dictionary. Viable, like, for instance, 3 stars in the App Store. 2 stars, 1 star, probably not viable. So if you're thinking that's not enough to get that high rating, don't do it. Maybe develop this way, but ship when you get the whole thing. That's fine. But usually, when I take people through an exercise like this, well, actually, always, it's never the whole thing. Never, ever, ever is it the whole thing. So that's the concept, minimum viable increment. If we apply that, how do we get the money? Now, this is not a real example. This is a made-up one. I have a real one at the end, which is a little bit more dramatic than this. Use your numbers. I'm going to use 100K. Let's say that when you've done an ROI analysis, hopefully you do one of those, you have a gut feeling, you've got some numbers behind it, whatever, that says that I'm going to make or save or reduce my risk by $100,000 a month once this goes into production. So 3 months, that's $300,000. Now, we all know that you don't just ship and you make money. You got to fix the bugs, convince people to buy, or convince the client to actually, convince your customer to actually use the thing and not use the good old legacy thing. There's ramp up and ramp down. I'm factoring that out. So if I break it up into minimum viable increments by value, let's say the first one gives 60%, the second one gives 40%. I don't know why I would ever do that. I just made $300,000. That's pretty motivating. It gets better if I get to the place where my Agile capability allows me to ship more frequently. I just made $480,000, and I'm only using $100,000 a month for this little project. Imagine with your real projects times those hundreds of projects. I don't know about you, but I'd kind of like to get a share of that. So whether you get a share or not, wouldn't you like to be associated with doing this? Imagine how that'll help your career, right? So $480,000, my simple example. This one actually is the biggest moneymaker right here. This next one, and you can combine them. I'm not going to, but you can. So this is not a trick question. So let's say I look at my allocation spreadsheet, how I've allocated my resources, which I think is people, but I've allocated my resources. I've got 6 projects, 10 people allocated to each of these projects. How many real people in your experience do you think that is? Anybody shout out a number? 10, okay. What do other people think? What are some other numbers? Just shout a random number. 5, oh God. What are some other ones? 30, okay, I'm feeling a little better over there. Let's just average it to say 20. So if I only have 20 real people, Agile says, then only do as much as you can do with those people and get it done. All hands on deck. All hands on deck. Get those 2 done and do that for the next 2 and the next 2. Now, there's an inherent problem with this. Anybody want to point out what the inherent problem with this is? What do I have to do that I didn't have to do before? Prioritize. That's really hard work. I don't know if I want to do that. Oh, really? Wouldn't you like to get $3.6 million from doing that? To me, that's pretty motivating. I'd like to be getting that or being associated with doing that kind of thing, right? Now, this is not necessarily the real world, right? It's not this easy. But regardless of how much it means, that's a pretty large potential upside. It doesn't matter if you only get 10 or 20% of it, it's still a lot of money. So how do we do that? Well, here's a real example of a before. So this happened in about the span of 30 seconds, which was pretty dizzying. So I was talking to a client, and they brought me through. I asked them, hey, what are some projects that when you guys heard about them, you immediately said, oh my God, if we had a magic wand, we'd put that in production today. And they came up with 4. One of them, and this was for a company doing financial transactions, and they were trying to add a new credit card type. I think it was American Express or Diners Club or something like that. Anyway, so they had the business idea way back there. A year later, this is a year later, it got the green light through the process. And then they were planning to, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, another year later, do the initial rollout to the first market. Let's figure it out with the first market. Now, they were planning to develop the whole thing and then give it to a segment of the market, and then another segment. So the full rollout was going to be there at the end, and they estimated their ROI was $250,000 per quarter. Ramp up, ramp down, I know that. So this turned into the potential upside of $2.5 million in the real world. 2.25, sorry. Now, how did they do that? Well, they haven't done it yet. But how did they think they were going to do it? Basically, by doing this. So what they're moving towards is taking all of those projects, the 200 projects or whatever, for them it was about 100, looking at them and saying, where's the gold? Breaking it down into minimum viable increments. Just not the whole thing, looking at the first few MVIs for a bunch of their projects. Taking those and saying, all right, if these were user stories, what would you do? What would you do with them next? What's that? Size them. Okay, you got the size, now what? Just randomly work on them? Prioritize them. Bingo. Prioritize them and limit your projects in progress. If you can only do 4, then only do 4. I'm sorry, if you only have enough people to do each of them fully, all hands on deck, then only do 4. Now, in their case, they could do 20 all hands on deck. And to go from 100 in flight to 20 was kind of a system shock. But you know what? $2.25 million just for one of them. That's kind of motivating. And the rest are next. No touching them. Now, that's hard because we've trained people for 40 years in this industry. If there's not a coder tapping a keyboard, it's probably never going to happen. So please tap the keyboard on my project, right? And that's a lot of tapping for 200 projects. So the next thing you do is you say, how much wood am I going to put behind that arrow? All right, so for the yellow project, it was 3 teams, et cetera, et cetera. That's everybody they have in IT, nobody working on the rest. So for 200, it's typically maybe 20 teams, maybe 20 projects. Hard to do, I understand. As a result, they realized, so some of the value they're not going to get because it's too late. But if they had been working this way from the beginning, they would have actually been able to start it 1 quarter later, right? So something finished in a quarter, next up, this one. And rather than develop the whole thing, develop the first MVI for that target market and roll it out. Now, it turns out that with their business partner, they had planned to do stage at A, B, C, D markets and develop it D, C, B, A. So that what happened in that 30 seconds was, oh my God, we got to go call our partner. So they're not going to get the whole thing, but they're going to get a lot of it. So Scrum won't help you with this. Sorry. Scrum won't help you with this. If you look at, let's see if I get this right. So there is Scrum right there. There's a Scrum team, that little bitty circle right there. That's one, that's another one, that's another one. That's everything you know about Scrum. If you want this to work across the whole enterprise, you have to do something more. And let me give you a simple example. Who can name even one practice that Scrum, Kanban, or XP has specific to the practice named, documented, that helps you coordinate the work of multiple teams or helps you work up into the business. Anybody, anything. Scrum of Scrums comes from the Agile community. Retrospectives, how does that help you with multiple teams? So there's only a couple, and it's a struggle to think of them, and we have to be creative, right? Scrum and Kanban and XP were not designed for that. So there are a couple of approaches. Scaled Agile is one. Enterprise Agility is another that gives you ways, specific name practices that have been tried and true out there to get these kinds of business benefits. The other one, which used to be my favorite, is create your own, right? Which meant hiring me, which is great. I'll help you create your own. So at Eliason, we can help you with these. We can help you do a business value analysis to find that money laying around. It's usually a lot of money. One client I worked with, we found $60 million on the table. That was kind of cool. We can help you with enterprise-wide Agile transformations. And to learn more, you can check out our website.